The sky of Varine Prime burned in deep red, filled with the cries of hunted creatures and the humming sound of war drones. The apex predator known as Karul stood on the cliff edge, watching the chaos below. His dark-scaled skin reflected the bloody light of twin suns, and his cold golden eyes studied the small cage near the ruins of the human outpost. Inside that cage sat a little girl, no older than 10, her face pale, her small hands trembling, her eyes wide with fear. The predator's sharp claws dug into the stone, not out of anger, but confusion. Humans were strange to him. The stories told across the stars said humans were violent beasts, destroyers, monsters in fragile skin. Yet this tiny human looked helpless, weak, small enough that a single claw could end her life. Around her stood the Varn soldiers, tall, insect-like aliens with armored bodies and cruel mandibles. They were laughing, their long tails swinging, their electric whips glowing bright blue. One of them pressed the whip against the girl's arm, and the sharp crack echoed through the air. The child screamed, her voice soft and broken, a sound that carried pain and fear across the empty plains. Karul felt something twist inside him, something he could not name. He was a hunter, a killer born and trained to feel nothing. But the sound of that child's scream, it reached a part of him he didn't know existed. The Varn commander spoke in a metallic voice. The humans think they can hide here, but we will burn their nests one by one. He raised the whip again, smiling as the girl begged, "Please." "Stop, please." The soldiers laughed louder. Karul's tail flicked once. Slicing the air, he wanted to turn away, to walk back into the shadows. But something kept him still. 15 minutes. That was all it took for the universe to change. 15 minutes between the scream of a child and the birth of something the galaxy would later fear. He watched as the commander grabbed the girl's chin, forcing her to look up. "Tell us where the others are." "Little creature," the alien hissed. Tears rolled down her cheeks, and her voice shook. "I don't know." "Please don't hurt me," the commander sneered. "Then we will keep asking until you remember." The whip came down again. The smell of burnt flesh filled the air. Karul's claws scraped the rock, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He had fought many wars, seen countless deaths. But this felt wrong. Predators killed to eat, to survive, not to play. The Varn were not hunters, they were something worse. Tormentors. He remembered the old code of his kind. Kill only what you respect. Spare what you do not understand. The girl, she was something he did not understand. A sudden flash of lightning lit up the dark clouds above, followed by the deep growl of thunder. Rain began to fall, thick and heavy, washing over the red soil. The Varn soldiers dragged the girl out of the cage and threw her into the mud. She cried, but no one cared. The commander raised the whip again, laughing as the storm grew, and then Karul moved. He didn't remember making the decision. 1 second he stood still, the next he was among them. The first Varn didn't even see him. One slash, one scream, blood sprayed across the mud. The second soldier turned, firing his plasma weapon, but Karul was faster. He leaped, crushing the alien's skull with one hand. The commander stepped back, shocked. "You dare, hunter?" Karul's voice was deep and calm. "You call this war? Torture, this is not the way," the commander hissed. "Humans deserve pain." Karul's eyes burned gold. "No creature deserves this," he moved again. A blur in the rain. Claws flashed, bones cracked. The commander tried to escape, but Karul caught him and threw him into the mud beside the girl. For a moment the predator looked at her, small, fragile, her clothes torn, her eyes filled with shock. Then he looked back at the dying Varn. "You fear humans, but you should fear what they awaken in others." The wind howled through the ruins, and silence followed. Only the sound of rain and the girl's quiet sobs filled the air. Karul stood still, unsure of what to do. He had just broken the ancient law. Never interfere with prey, not of your hunt. The girl looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." He stared down at her, the storm reflecting in his golden eyes. Her words echoed in his mind, soft but powerful. "Thank you." Two simple sounds that carried more weight than any weapon. He turned his gaze toward the horizon, where more Varn ships moved through the clouds. He knew others would come, and soon they would find the bodies. They would hunt him now, call him a traitor. But Karul didn't move. For the first time in his life, he didn't care about rules 15 minutes ago. He had been a silent predator watching another species suffer. Now he was something else, something dangerous. The girl was still alive, and that meant there was still a chance. He didn't know why he saved her. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was something deeper. But one truth was clear. In the cold rain of Varine Prime, the galaxy's most feared predator had just made his first mistake. And somewhere deep inside that mistake, something even more dangerous was awakening. Not in him, but in the small human girl who had survived. She looked at him again, whispering through the rain, "They'll come back." Karul nodded slowly. Let them, because in 15 minutes, the hunter had learned something new. Humans were not prey. They were the storm itself. The rain still poured over the ruins of Varine Prime. Cold and endless, Karul stood in silence, his black armor dripping water and blood, his golden eyes watching the small girl who sat shivering beside the fire he had made from broken drone parts. Her name, he had learned, was Lila, a simple name. Yet it echoed in his mind like a strange melody. She looked fragile, bruised, scared, and silent. But there was something inside her eyes that Karul had never seen before. Not just fear, but fire, a spark that refused to die. He had fought monsters across galaxies, seen worlds burn, but never had he seen such strength in something so small. And that thought, that single thought, began to break something deep inside him. He turned his head toward the dark horizon. Scanning for the Varn, their ships had retreated for now. But he knew they would come back, they always did. The Varn never left unfinished work. His instincts screamed to leave, to disappear into the shadows as his kind always did. Predators did not protect prey. They hunted, they survived, and they moved on. But now, standing beside this human child, he felt trapped between two worlds, the world of the hunter, and something new, something he did not understand. Lila spoke softly, breaking the silence. You killed them." Karul looked at her, his voice low and rough. "They were not worthy of life." She frowned, hugging her knees. "They were hurting me. You stopped them." He said nothing. He didn't know why he had in his tribe mercy was weakness. A predator who hesitated became prey. Yet when he saw the girl's pain, his claws refused to strike her. His instincts had screamed kill, but his heart had whispered protect. The girl looked up at him again, her eyes reflecting the flames. "Why did you help me?" The question hit harder than any weapon. Karul opened his mouth, but no words came. He had no answer. He only knew that when he saw her cry, something inside him broke apart. He turned away, growling softly, "Do not speak, small one. Save your strength." But the girl did not listen. "Are you going to leave me?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, but her words carried fear. He paused, staring at the flames. He should have said yes, he should have walked away. But instead he said no. The fire crackled between them. Lila closed her eyes, slowly falling asleep. Her small body curled close to the warmth. Karul stayed awake, his eyes glowing in the dark, scanning the storm, every drop of rain, every sound in the wind, and he listened, alert. But his mind was not focused on danger. It was focused on doubt. He remembered his commander's voice. Deep, proud, cruel. "You were born a hunter, Karul, born to stand above the weak." And now he sat beside the weakest creature in the galaxy, protecting her like she was something sacred. The shame burned in his chest, but it did not feel like weakness, it felt like change. He looked at her small face, soft and peaceful now in sleep. She trusted him. Him, a killer of worlds. The thought was almost unbearable. How could she trust what she did not understand? How could she trust something that had taken so many lives? Then he heard the sound, distant but growing. Engines humming low through the clouds. Varn search ships, they had returned. Karul stood up at once, scanning the sky. The ships were far, but moving fast. He looked down at the girl, still sleeping. He could leave her now, vanish before they saw him. No one would ever know. The universe would go back to normal. But he didn't move. Instead, he crouched and gently lifted her into his arms. Her head rested against his armor, her breathing soft for the first time in his life. He felt the strange warmth of another life near him, a fragile warmth that stirred something deep inside his chest. He whispered, "You should not make me feel this way, little human." And then he began to move through the rain, his heavy steps silent, his presence hidden beneath the storm. Behind him, the wreckage of the camp still burned. The scent of smoke mixed with the rain. Ahead of him stretched the vast dark forest of Varine Prime, full of predators, full of death, but Karul did not care. He would find a place to hide the girl. He would protect her. Even if it meant breaking every law of his kind. The Varn ships passed above. Scanning the ground with bright blue lights, Karul held his breath, pressing against the roots of a fallen tree. The girl stirred but did not wake. The searchlights passed by. He waited until they were gone, then kept moving. Each step took him deeper into the forest. Each heartbeat pounded louder with the same thought. Why am I doing this? The answer never came, only silence and rain by dawn. He reached the edge of a valley. A cave hid between two cliffs. Half covered by moss and vines, he entered, laying the girl gently on the ground. Her eyes opened for a moment. Where are we? Safe, he said simply. For now, she smiled weakly. Then drifted back to sleep. Karul turned to face the entrance of the cave. His claws ready, his eyes sharp. The storm outside had stopped. But inside him a new one had begun. He had broken the code, defied his tribe, and saved a human. He had traded honor for something he didn't understand. And yet when he looked back at the sleeping child, he felt no regret, only a strange peace. And an even stranger fear because deep down, Karul knew something terrible. The Varn would not stop. The humans would come looking. And when they found each other again, the galaxy would burn. But for now, in that quiet cave, with the firelight dancing on the walls, an apex predator sat in silence, haunted by the sound of a child's thank you, and the weight of a new kind of war, the war within himself. The cave was silent except for the soft sound of rain dripping from the edges of the cliff. Karul sat near the fire, his golden eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The little human, Lila, slept peacefully on a pile of soft leaves he had gathered. Outside the storm had passed, but danger had not. Every instinct in Karul's body screamed that he was being hunted. His kind could feel when something watched them, a prickling sensation crawling down the spine. He stood slowly, his massive frame moving like a shadow. The forest beyond the cave seemed calm, but he knew calm often hid death. He stepped out, scanning the trees, his senses sharp. There, movement. A small glimmer of light flashed between the branches. He crouched low, sniffing the air, not Varn, something else. He moved closer, silent as the mist, and then he saw it. A small, half-buried drone blinking red in the mud. A tracker the Varn had left it behind, and it had picked up his trail. Karul crushed it with one claw, sparks flying in the rain. He growled low, and they were closer than he thought. The child was not safe here anymore, but before he turned back, something caught his attention, a scent, faint, metallic but familiar, human technology. He followed the smell through the trees until he reached a broken ridge. Below him, hidden under the roots of a fallen tree, was the wreck of a small human escape pod. Its metal hull was scorched and bent, smoke long gone. He jumped down. Landing softly beside it, the hatch was open. Inside were burned panels, shattered glass, and dried blood. Someone had crawled out. He looked closer and saw a small pendant lying in the dirt, a silver star with the letters E.L. He remembered the girl's voice from the night before. My dad said he would come for me. He looked at the pendant again. So this was her father's ship. He must have tried to protect her. The thought made Karul's chest tighten. In his species, family meant nothing. Children were raised by war, not love, but humans. They were different. He searched the wreckage and found a damaged data chip still glowing faintly blue. He pressed it against the side of his armor, connecting it to his internal interface. The projection flickered to life. A small hologram of a human man appeared, tired but determined. Lila, the recording said, voice trembling. If you find this, I'm sorry. The Varn found us sooner than expected. I'm heading north to the old mining facility. There's a beacon there. Maybe someone will hear us. Stay alive, my little star. Then the image faded. Karul stood in silence, staring at the empty air where the hologram had been. He had never felt pity before, not for prey, not for enemies, but now it filled him like fire. His human father had fought to save his child, and somehow she was still alive. He clenched his claws, looking back toward the cave. He had found her by accident, or maybe fate. Now he understood. The humans weren't weak. They were stubborn, even when the universe crushed them. They refused to die. Karul climbed back to the cave, his massive frame moving fast through the mist. When he entered, the girl was awake, rubbing her eyes. Where did you go? She asked softly. Looking, he said simply, showing her the pendant. Her eyes widened. That's my dad's, he nodded. He's alive, maybe. He went north, to a place called the mining facility. Her face lit up with hope, small but bright. Then we have to go, she said quickly. Karul hesitated. It's dangerous. The Varn will be searching the area. She looked up at him, her voice steady. You said I was safe with you, right? That single question broke through his hesitation like lightning. He looked at her, so small, so fragile, yet her words carried more strength than most warriors he had met. He finally nodded. Yes? You are. They packed what little they had in a small light crystal, a few scraps of food and a plasma knife Karul had taken from a dead soldier. Before they left, he erased all signs of the fire, hiding their tracks in the mud. Then, with the girl on his back, they began their journey north. The forest of Varine Prime was not kind. Vines twisted like snakes. Glowing insects hissed from the shadows and strange beasts watched them from the trees. Lila clung to him tightly, but she didn't cry. Every time a sound echoed in the dark, Karul's claws flexed, ready to kill. Hours passed before they reached the edge of a river glowing faintly green. Karul stopped, scanning the other side. A sound came from the distance, mechanical, sharp. The Varn were using trackers again. He crouched behind the rocks, pulling the girl close. The searchlights passed above the river. Scanning the ground, Lila whispered, Are they going to find us? Karul shook his head slowly. Not if they want to live. The ships passed, but one of them turned back, lowering near the river. Karul's muscles tensed, his instincts returning. The instincts of the hunter. He handed Lila the pendant. Stay low, don't move. Before she could speak, he vanished into the mist. Seconds later, the forest erupted with screams. The Varn ship's lights flickered wildly. Followed by a loud crash, Lila covered her ears, terrified. When the noise stopped, Karul returned, covered in dark blood, silent as a shadow. They won't follow anymore, he said simply. They crossed the river under the light of the moons. Every step forward was heavy but filled with purpose. Karul looked at the girl walking beside him and realized something. He wasn't protecting her anymore. He was following her because she carried something he didn't. Hope. And for the first time in his life, the apex predator began to understand the truth his kind had always feared. Humans didn't rule because they were strong. They ruled because they never stopped fighting. Even when all they had left was a whisper and a heartbeat, the twin moons of Varine Prime hung above the valley like pale eyes. Watching everything below, Karul and Lila moved through the broken forest, stepping over roots and rusted metal remains of an old battlefield. The smell of smoke and decay filled the air. The further they walked, the clearer it became. Something terrible had happened here long ago. Old human machines lay scattered in the mud. Cracked helmets, burned flags, and silent drones with bullet holes through their shells. Lila walked beside him now, no longer carried. Her small face hardened by fear and exhaustion. Every few steps she looked up at Karul, searching his face for hope. But the predator's expression never changed. Calm, controlled, unreadable. When the wind blew, it carried voices, faint echoes of the past. Karul could almost imagine the screams of soldiers, the thunder of weapons. This place was a graveyard of courage and pain. He knew what such places did to the living. They tested the spirit, broke the weak, and changed the strong. The mining facility was close now, hidden behind a mountain ridge. The last beacon of human resistance on this planet. But the Varn knew it too. Their ships had begun circling again, black shadows moving across the clouds. Karul stopped suddenly, raising a claw for silence. Lila froze. He tilted his head, listening, and something was off. The forest was too quiet. Even the insects had gone still. Then came the sound, faint at first, then growing louder, metal on stone, a mechanical march. Karul grabbed Lila and pulled her behind a half-buried transport. Stay down, he whispered, his voice low and sharp. Through the cracks, they saw them, Varn soldiers, dozens of them moving in formation. At their center walked a figure taller than the rest. Its armor was black with red lines glowing along its limbs. Karul knew that design. It belonged to a prime warden, one of the Varn elite. The enforcers of their empire, he whispered to himself. They sent a hunter. The warden stopped and turned. Its red eyes scanning the trees, Karul held his breath. His claws flexing silently, he could fight. Yes, but not with the child here. Lila looked up at him, her whisper trembling. What are we going to do? Survive, he said simply. They waited until the soldiers passed, their footsteps fading into the valley below. Then Karul stood, his armor dripping mud. "We go around," he said, but as they turned, the air cracked with energy. A sniper shot hit the ground near their feet. The light blinded them for a second. "Run!" Karul roared, grabbing Leela's arm and pulling her through the smoke. Blasts tore through the trees, burning holes into the forest floor. Karul moved fast, faster than any human could follow. But the child slowed him down. He could hear the Varn shouting commands behind them, closing in. They reached a cliffside. The path ended in a drop into the dark valley below. Karul glanced down. Too steep to climb, too far to jump safely with the girl. "We're trapped," Lila whispered, her voice shaking. Karul turned to face the approaching soldiers, his golden eyes blazing. "Then we fight," he growled. The first Varn leaped from the shadows, its blade humming. Karul moved like lightning. Claws met steel. Sparks flashed. The alien screamed as he tore through its armor. Another came, then two more. He fought them all, his body a blur of motion, his growls echoing through the night. Lila hid behind the rocks, watching in terror and awe. But then from the smoke, the warden appeared. It was massive, almost Karul's size. Its voice was cold and hollow. "You shame your kind." "Predator," Karul's tail lashed. "You shame the hunt." The warden lifted its spear, lightning dancing across the tip. "Step aside, or die with the human." Karul's reply was a snarl. "I choose neither." They clashed, the impact shook the ground. Karul blocked the first strike, but the second hit his shoulder. Burning through his armor, he roared in pain. Striking back with his claws, metal met flesh. Blood splattered across the stones. The warden was strong, but Karul fought with something more than strength. He fought with purpose. Lila watched, trembling, unable to look away. Every time Karul fell, he rose again. Every time the warden mocked him, he struck harder. It wasn't just a battle. It was a storm made of rage and loyalty. Finally, the warden grabbed him by the throat, lifting him high. "Your kind will hunt you for this." "Traitor," it hissed. Karul's claws dug into its arm, his voice like thunder. "Let them." Then with one last roar, he drove his claws through the warden's chest, tearing out the power core. The red light faded from its eyes, and it fell to the ground lifeless. Silence returned, broken only by the sound of Karul's heavy breathing. He fell to one knee wounded. Lila ran to him, her eyes wide with fear. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he said, though his side was burning. He looked at her, alive, safe, brave, and for the first time, he smiled, a rare, broken, honest smile. But before they could rest, a distant sound echoed through the valley. Engines, many of them, the Varn reinforcements. Karul stood again, despite the pain. He looked toward the mountain ridge where the mining facility waited beyond. "That's where your father went," he said. She nodded, wiping her tears. "Then that's where we'll go." He lifted her again, his strength fading but his resolve harder than ever. Behind them, the forest burned from the battle. Ahead of them, the dark ridge waited, full of danger and truth. As they disappeared into the mist, the galaxy shifted a little for that night. A predator had become something more than a killer, and a child had become something more than prey. Together they were a spark, a small, fragile light in a universe that had forgotten mercy, and that spark was about to set the stars on fire. The air was thick with smoke and ash as dawn rose over Vereen Prime. The battlefield behind them was silent now, littered with the remains of metal and flesh. Karul's wounds burned. His armor cracked and scorched, but he kept walking. The small human girl clung to his back, silent, her tiny hands gripping the thick ridges of his armor. Ahead, the old mining facility waited, half buried in the mountains. Hidden under layers of fog, it looked dead from afar. But Karul could smell movement, humans, he didn't know how many. But the air carried the faint scent of oil, sweat, and fear. They were alive, hiding, waiting for something. He crouched behind a ridge, scanning the area. Dozens of broken towers rose from the ground like jagged teeth. Inside one of them, faint orange lights flickered, the humans' camp. But getting there wasn't going to be easy. The Varn had surrounded the place, setting up checkpoints and patrols. The child whispered, "My dad, he's there." Karul nodded. "Then we will reach him." They moved quietly through the rocks, every step measured, every breath controlled for Karul. This was the hunt, and only now. He wasn't the predator, he was the shield. And the girl was what he protected. When the nearest Varn patrol came close, he waited for the perfect second, one swift strike, silent, clean. The alien never made a sound before it fell. Lila watched in awe as Karul dragged the body into the shadows. His golden eyes met hers. Fear is good, but do not let it control you. She nodded slowly, whispering, I'm not afraid anymore. Those words stayed with him as they crawled closer to the facility's entrance. Then with a sudden noise, a small metallic chirp from above. Karul looked up and cursed under his breath. A Varn drone, scout type, small but deadly. Its red lens locked onto him instantly. Down, he shouted, pulling Lila behind a pile of scrap as the drone fired. Blue plasma bolts tore through the air. Burning through the rock, he leaped from cover, throwing a blade straight through the drone's eye. It exploded in a flash of light, the sound echoing through the valley, too loud within seconds. Sirens began to wail across the mountains. Varn troops started moving toward the mining base. Shouting commands, Karul growled low. They know we're here. Lila's eyes filled with fear. What do we do now? He stood tall, his voice calm but fierce. We finish this. They ran toward the facility as the first blasts hit the ground behind them. Karul's strength carried them through the storm of fire. When they reached the gate, he slammed his clawed hand against the metal. Open! He roared. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a voice crackled from an old speaker. Who are you? Lila stepped forward, shouting, It's me, Lila Emerson. My dad is inside. There was silence, then the heavy gate began to move. It groaned open just enough for them to slip through before it shut again. Inside, lights flickered and weapons were raised. Dozens of human soldiers surrounded them, dirty, tired, but alive. One of them stepped forward. A tall man with a scar down his cheek holding a rifle. His eyes widened when he saw the girl. Lila? He whispered. She ran into his arms. Dad. For a moment, time stopped. The man, Captain Elias Emerson, held his daughter close, tears mixing with dirt on his face. He looked up at Karul, his expression changing from relief to shock. What is that? He demanded, raising his weapon. Lila turned quickly. No, don't. He saved me. The soldiers froze, confused. Elias lowered his rifle slowly, studying the towering creature. Karul met his eyes. She was alone. I found her. The Varn were torturing her. The captain nodded slowly, his voice heavy. Then I owe you my life. Karul's tone was cold. No, you owe me nothing. But your people are surrounded. You will not last long. Elias's jaw tightened. We know. That's why we're not hiding anymore. He turned to his soldiers. Get ready. This is it. Karul frowned. You plan to fight? Elias nodded. We've been waiting for the right moment. The mining drills still work. We can use them to flood the tunnels and cut off the Varn from above. Karul understood immediately. A trap. Dangerous, brilliant human outside. The sound of ships grew louder. The ground trembled with each step of the Varn machines approaching. Elias looked at his daughter, then at Karul. If you want to live, you should go. This will be hell. Karul's eyes narrowed. I have already been to hell. The humans moved fast. Loading weapons, sealing doors, setting charges. Karul joined them without question, lifting heavy equipment and covering the outer gates. The soldiers watched him with awe. The legendary apex predator now fighting beside them. When Lila saw him standing among them, ready for battle, she smiled for the first time in days. The first blast hit the outer wall, shaking the entire facility. Elias shouted, Positions! This is it. Blue plasma fire lit the sky. The Varn charged through the smoke, roaring. Karul was the first to meet them. His claws tore through armor like paper. The humans fired behind him, bullets and plasma mixing in a storm of death. The sound of battle filled the air, metal screaming. Engines roaring, Karul moved like a shadow of destruction. Every enemy that came close fell. He protected the humans like they were his own pack. Then, the ground split open. The mining drills roared to life. Spinning through rock and enemy alike, steam and dust filled the air. The humans triggered the flood systems. Water burst from the tunnels, sweeping through the battlefield, drowning machines and soldiers. It was chaos, beautiful, violent chaos. Elias grabbed his daughter and shouted, It's working! But above them another sound grew, deep and thunderous. A massive Varn warship appeared in the clouds. Lowering toward the base, its lights burned like suns. Karul looked up, his claws tightening. "This fight isn't over," he growled. Elias turned to him. "Then we finish it together." And in that burning dawn, human and predator stood side by side, two beings who were never meant to meet, now bound by war. Behind them, the rising sun shone red through the smoke. The galaxy would remember this day, because it was the day the humans stopped running and started fighting back, the day the uprising began. The sky above Vereen Prime burned red, filled with smoke, falling debris, and the roar of engines. The massive Varn warship hovered like a metal god above the ruined mining facility, its shadow stretching across the mountains. Below, chaos reigned. Explosions, screams, and flashes of blue plasma fire filled the dark valley. The humans fought like cornered beasts, and beside them, the apex predator Karul tore through enemy lines like a living storm. Each roar of his voice was louder than thunder. Each swing of his claws painted the ground in blood. Yet for every Varn he killed, two more took its place. They came from the skies, from the tunnels, from the mountains, endless, merciless. The humans were outnumbered, but not out of fight inside the facility. Captain Elias shouted commands over the intercom, his voice hoarse. "Hold the line. Protect the core room at all costs." The humans had one last plan, a desperate one. Beneath the facility was an old fusion core, still active, still powerful. If they could overload it, they could destroy the entire mountain. It would kill the Varnum themselves. Karul heard the humans' voices echoing through the comms and understood their plan. He turned to Elias, his golden eyes fierce. "You plan to die here?" Elias nodded grimly. "Better to take them with us than live as slaves," Karul growled. "No death without purpose. There is always another way." But Elias only looked at him, his face pale. Not this time. The building shook as another blast struck the outer wall. The humans inside screamed as the roof cracked open. Lila huddled beside a group of injured soldiers. Holding a small plasma pistol she could barely lift. When she saw Karul enter, covered in ash and blood, she ran to him. "You came back," she said. He nodded. "I told you, little one. I will not leave you." The warship's engines roared louder, sending waves of heat through the air. Karul looked up at the metal giant in the sky, its weapons charging, its cannons glowing blue. If it fired, the entire mountain would vanish in light. He turned to Elias. "You want to destroy them? Then let me buy you the time." The captain's eyes widened. "You can't." But Karul was already moving. He ran toward the entrance, his wounds burning, his muscles screaming. The Varn troops outside opened fire. Plasma bolts hit his armor, searing his skin. He didn't stop. He was beyond pain now. He was a force of nature. He leaped over the barricade, landing in the middle of a squad. One swipe, 4 soldiers down, a tail strike. Another thrown across the rocks. He roared, his voice echoing across the valley. Even the warship paused, as if the universe itself listened to that sound. Above, the warship's main cannon began to charge, a glowing sphere of energy growing brighter and brighter. Karul looked at it and whispered to himself, "Not yet." He leaped onto a fallen transport, then to a tower, climbing higher and higher until he stood on a broken beam that reached toward the ship's belly. From here, he could see the massive engines pulsing like hearts of light. He crouched low, coiling his legs, and then he jumped. For a moment, it felt like flying. The wind tore around him, fire burned below, and the warship filled the sky before him. He crashed into the metal hull, claws digging deep into the armor. Sparks exploded under his hands. Inside, the Varn crew screamed in alarm. The ship's shields flickered. They had never expected something like this. Karul tore through the outer shell, ripping cables and metal apart. He roared into the hole he made, and then he entered. Inside the warship, alarms blared, red lights flashing through the corridors. He moved like a beast in a cage, unstoppable, unstoppable. Every guard that came at him died before it could scream. He tore open the reactor chamber door and saw the pulsing blue light of the ship's heart. Meanwhile, below, Elias and his team worked fast to arm the fusion core. Lila stayed near the console, tears on her face. "Dad," she whispered. "He's still out there." Elias stopped for a second, his eyes heavy with guilt. "I know, sweetheart," he said softly. "He's buying us time." Above them, Karul stood before the reactor. He stared at the glowing core, pure energy, pure death. He could destroy it, but that would mean he'd never make it back. He touched his chest where Lila had rested her hand once and said quietly, "For the small one." Then he tore the control rods free. The ship trembled. Alarms screamed louder. Energy began to surge out of control. Karul ran for the breach, but the explosion came too soon. A wall of blue fire tore through the corridor. Throwing him into the open sky, he fell, burning. Crashing into the mountain below, Elias looked up as the warship exploded in the sky. A blinding light filled the heavens, followed by a shockwave that threw everyone to the ground. When the light faded, the warship was gone, just a rain of fire falling across the horizon. The humans stared in disbelief. "He did it," one soldier whispered. Lila ran toward the edge, shouting, "Karul!" Through the smoke and dust, a shadow moved slowly, painfully. The predator rose from the rubble. Covered in burns and blood, but alive, Lila ran to him, tears streaming down her face. "You came back," she whispered. Hugging his massive arm, he looked down at her, his voice faint but steady. "You humans? You never stop, do you?" She smiled through her tears. "Neither do you." Elias approached, resting a hand on the creature's shoulder. "Without you, none of us would have survived," he said quietly. Karul looked toward the burning sky. "The war is not over," he said. "The Varn will return." Elias nodded. "Then they'll find Earth ready this time." The wind blew across the valley, carrying the smell of smoke and victory above them. The clouds glowed red and gold as the sun rose again. For the first time, predator and human stood side by side, equals, and in that moment a legend was born. The story of the hunter who turned against his own kind, and the little human who showed him what strength truly meant. But far beyond the stars, the Varn Empire had already heard the news. They would come again, and next time they would bring the full weight of their war. The final battle had been won, but the real war had only just begun. The morning after the battle came slowly, covered in a gray mist that rolled down from the mountains. The air was quiet now, heavy with the smell of smoke and blood. Ash fell like soft snow over the ruins of the mining facility. The once roaring war machines lay silent, their metal shells twisted and blackened. For the first time in many suns, Varine Prime was still. Karul sat on a ridge overlooking the valley, his body covered in burns and deep cuts. He had not moved for hours. Staring at the rising sun, his armor was cracked, his claws dull with dried blood, but his golden eyes were alive. Watching, thinking, remembering behind him, the surviving humans worked in silence. They buried their dead, repaired broken weapons, and gathered supplies. No one spoke much because there were no words strong enough for what they had lost. Yet beneath the silence, something had changed. They were no longer prey. They had survived, and that meant everything. Lila walked toward Karul, her small boots crunching over the gravel. She was bandaged and bruised, but her eyes still shone with that strange light he could never understand. In her hand, she held a small pendant, the silver star she had found in the wreckage days ago. She climbed up beside him, sitting quietly for a while. They said nothing. The wind blew softly, carrying the scent of rain and rust. Finally, she whispered, "You saved us." Karul didn't look at her. "No, little one. You saved yourselves. Humans always do," she frowned. "But you stopped the big ship. You stopped them all." He turned his head slightly, a faint growl deep in his chest. For now. His eyes followed the horizon where smoke still rose from the battlefield. "The Varn will come again. They will not forgive this." Lila looked at him, her voice trembling. "Then we'll fight again." He studied her small face. Dirt on her cheeks, tears dried on her skin, and yet, behind those human eyes, he saw something unbreakable. "You are strange creatures," he said softly. "Small, fragile, and yet you face giants without fear." She smiled weakly. "That's what my dad always said. Humans never give up." They sat in silence again, watching the clouds drift across the sky below. Captain Elias and the soldiers were preparing to leave. The humans had found a working transport, old but functional. They planned to move toward the southern ridge, where an old human beacon still transmitted faint signals. Maybe Earth would hear it, maybe not, but they had to try. Elias approached them, limping slightly. When he reached the ridge, he saluted Karul. Not as a soldier greets a commander, but as one warrior honors another. "You should come with us," Elias said. "We can find a ship. Leave this planet." Karul shook his head slowly. "Your enemies will follow your signal. Someone must stay behind to slow them." The captain frowned. "You'll die." Karul's eyes glowed faintly. "All hunters die, but few die with purpose." Lila grabbed his arm. "No, you can't stay. You can come with us, and you can come to Earth." He looked down at her small hand resting against his scarred skin. "I have seen Earth's people through you," he said quietly. "You carry its spirit." He placed his massive claw gently over her hand. "Careful not to harm her. My kind fears yours for a reason. Not because you are strong, but because you are endless." Her eyes filled with tears. "I don't want you to die." He smiled just a little. "Then I will try not to." He reached to his belt and unhooked a small blade, black steel etched with alien markings. He handed it to her. "This is my blood mark," he said. "It means you are under my hunt. If any of my kind ever comes for you, show them this, and they will know you are protected by Ka-Rul, the fallen hunter." Lila clutched the blade close to her chest. Tears falling down her face, Elias placed a hand on her shoulder. But he too looked away, hiding the emotion in his eyes. He knew this creature, this warrior, had done what no army could. He had given humanity a second chance. The engines of the transport hummed in the distance. It was time to go. Lila looked at him one last time, her voice soft. "Will I ever see you again?" Ka-Rul's gaze turned to the sky, now painted orange and gold. "If the stars will it, little one," he said. "The hunt always circles back." As the humans climbed aboard their ship, Ka-Rul turned away, walking toward the smoking ruins below. His movements were slower now, heavy with pain, but each step carried purpose. He stopped beside a fallen Varn soldier, pulled the alien's weapon from its grasp and looked toward the distant mountains. From beyond them faint lights shimmered, and not sunrise, but ships entering the atmosphere. The next wave, he growled low, the sound deep and steady. "So soon," he muttered. "Then come." The human's transport lifted off, its engines leaving a trail of smoke in the sky from above. Lila looked out the window and saw the massive figure standing alone in the ruins. She pressed her hand against the glass, whispering, "Goodbye." Ka-Rul raised his head, sensing her gaze. He lifted his hand, and not in farewell, but in promise. When the ship disappeared beyond the clouds, he turned back to the battlefield. The wind howled through the broken towers. Carrying the smell of blood and fire, Ka-Rul stood tall, a silhouette against the burning light. Once he had been a hunter without mercy. Now, he was the protector of those he once called prey. He looked at the wreckage around him and whispered to the empty air, "This is what they fear. The day the predator learns compassion." Above him, the Varn fleet grew larger, their ships cutting through the clouds like blades. Ka-Rul flexed his claws, blood dripping from his side. His voice rumbled like thunder. "You will not touch them again." The storm began to rise, lightning flashing across the sky, and there, alone on the broken world, Ka-Rul stood ready, wounded, defiant, alive. His golden eyes burned bright as the sky filled with enemy fire. He took one deep breath and whispered the ancient words of his tribe. "The hunt never ends." And when the first ship descended, he smiled.